Welcome to Shelf Talkers, a podcast from Village Well Books and Coffee in downtown Culver City.
Hey everybody, this is Julia Elizabeth Evans. Jared is out, and it's just me on the mic. We are interviewing Kayla Min Andrews, daughter of Katherine Min. Katherine Min is the author of The Fetishist. The Fetishist is a posthumous publication. It just came out in January. And in this interview, we hear the story of how The Fetishist came to be published. We discussed how even after her passing, Katherine Min is teaching her daughter Kayla how to be a writer. We talk about what motivates writers to keep on writing. And then at the end of the podcast, you'll hear a very fun book recommendation from a local author, Kim Purcell. So stick around. So today, I'm so honored to be in conversation with our guest, Kayla Min Andrews.
Hi.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Kayla is here to talk about the, posthumous? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the posthumous publication of her mother, Katherine Min's novel, The Fetishist, a book both the Los Angeles Times and the Washington Post are calling ahead of its time. Katherine Min received a National Endowment of the Arts Writers Grant, a Pushcart Prize, Sherwood Anderson Foundation Fiction Award, and now the Katherine Min MacDowell Fellowship exists. And Kayla, your mother's great name. So Kayla, you are so remarkable. You edited your late mother's manuscript and you wrote an afterword to The Fetishist that absolutely floored me, and I know every single person that's read the afterword in the book. And also your family is folded into our community at Village Well by way of your Uncle Colin. And so before we get in the interview, I just wanted to say how really truly honored, and this is such a privilege to celebrate your mother's life and your mother's work, and then also to celebrate you. You're just visiting Culver City, and where are you coming in from?
Yes, was just in San Francisco the day before yesterday, or flew in yesterday from San Francisco, where we did an event at Green Apple Books with Kathy Parkong. And I just realized I left my laptop in the San Francisco airport.
Oh, no.
It's been a lot of traveling.
That's fair. How many different spots, how many different cities are you going in for the Fetishist book tour?
So we've already been to New York, Philly, New Orleans, Seattle, San Francisco, and now Culver City. And in the future, next month, we're going to a couple places in North Carolina and Massachusetts, and maybe New Hampshire.
Nice. We'll start with our first question. The question we ask all of our guests is, would you please write a shelf talker for your mom's book, The Fetishist?
I'd love to. Yeah, that's a cool question. Obviously, if I were really doing this, I would obsess over it for like days and weeks and months and tweak it. But off the top of my head, The Fetishist is a literary page-turner, part thriller, part love story, part satire, about a young punk rocker who wants to get revenge on the man she holds responsible for her mother's death. You also get that man's perspective and the perspective of the one that got away, the love of his life, who he lost, Alma, who is a classical cellist. So you've got 3 musicians and a revenge plot, and it's exploring issues of Asian fetishism, desire, race, and grief, and many other things.
I get to read so many things as being a part of the Village Well community, and this book is, I know, going to be one of my favorite books of the year. And it's only January, and I already know that. So my question is, what was it like reading such raunchy and provocative prose from your mom, Katherine?
Well, it was in character for her, so I was, I grew up, reading her writing, or she would read her works in progress aloud to me, and so I knew like what she was capable of with words and the way she would like dive into difficult topics head on, and her humor, always with humor. I had a sense of what I could expect, but Kathy Parkong mentions in her introduction, and Sally Kim, the editor, mentioned just that this is a topic that hasn't been explored directly in depth before, especially from the point of view of the Asian woman. It's surprising to me that it hasn't been, and it's something that we all know exists, or we all have experienced. It's a thing that's like an objective reality, and it feels weird that it hasn't been explored through literature.
Right, and Sally is your publisher, is that correct?
Yes, the editor and publisher.
The editor and publisher. And where do you fit in? How did you manage the transition? You talked about reading your mom's work all your life, the transition from this multi-hyphenate job of being daughter and reader to being daughter and editor. And then were you uppercase E editor of The Fetishist?
Yeah, it's an unusual situation. I don't think there's an exact word for my role with this book, but it started when I brought the manuscript to the agent PJ Mark, and then he brought in Sally Kim, the editor, and then decided to go ahead, and we wanted to publish it. And then Sally Kim mentioned some edits, some changes. There was one scene that was incomplete, and then there were some shifts in the characters' minds over time that Sally Kim thought it could be good to bring it out a little bit more. So the manuscript was complete. So I did work with Sally, and I did the edits, which was mostly adding a sentence here or a paragraph here throughout the storylines to bring out certain arcs a little bit more starkly, and then completing one scene which was unfinished. And then there were a couple other small things that like ideas I had for adding that Sally Kim liked. And so in a way, there was a collaboration between me and my mom on the level of the writing. Yeah, and now I'm representing Mom in trying to get the word out and meet readers and share the story of the novel and the story behind the novel.
Hear you without spoiling. I'm not one to believe in spoilers, but there are a few outliers where I would say I wouldn't want to spoil things, and The Fetishist is an outlier. But do you have any examples in which either your editor, Sally Kim, said, let's build on that, or even when as you were reading this manuscript, you knew, like, let's add a sentence here or there? Is there any specific moments when that happened?
Well, one thing is there's a Facebook message from Alma that Daniel receives, and it was originally at the end of the manuscript, but Sally Kim said, let's bring it up to the beginning, and it'll heighten the suspense, and it'll kind of get Alma on Daniel's mind sooner and just kind of bring her into the story sooner. It was a brilliant suggestion. And so, but when I moved it up, I had to add some things about him seeing the message at first when he's kind of in a rush and not really thinking about it straight, and then him thinking about it more throughout his ordeal, and then him rereading it at the end, towards the end of the novel, and seeing it in a different way. So that's one example of progression and a shift that wasn't there before. And then, yeah, there's a scene on a boat between the two lovers towards the end that was incomplete that I had to write. And it's the reckoning, right? These two people who haven't seen each other in a long time. And yeah, and then there's a small scene towards the end, because there wasn't a scene that brought the two female leads together on the page. They were always in different places and different times. And I just thought the older woman and the younger woman should be on the page at the same time. And I thought of a way to do that. And so I was able to write that. And that appears towards the end.
One of the things you said last night, so Kayla was so gracious, and everybody, it was such a great event we had last night, the author's event. You said how your mother wrote you a letter in which she wrote, I will be with, actually, could you tell us what your mother said in the letter that she wrote you at the end of her life?
Yeah. So it was my therapist's idea to ask my mom, Katherine Min, to write me a letter, just kind of saying what she saw in me and what she hoped for me and why she loved me, and just so that I would always have that, and so I could never forget after, because she was in hospice. Just one part that I always think about now, she wrote, I will, in all important ways, always be there for you. This is not the end for us. And she wrote, I believe that. I believe that we will continue to connect in new and unexpected and interesting ways. And when I first read that, I was like, what do you mean? You're going to die and then you're going to be gone. And how are we going to keep connecting in new ways, in interesting ways, in unexpected ways? It didn't make sense to me initially. And then I started writing after she died. And that was a moment of, I'm connecting with her in a new way, in an interesting way. And the conversations in my head with her or my perspective of her when I was a kid, seeing her write, it's taking on new meaning as I'm growing and changing. And then obviously with the Fetishist publication, it almost feels like we're touring the country now together in a way. And I'm getting to share her with people who never met her and her work. Yeah, it's definitely a new way of connecting. And so I didn't realize that our relationship was gonna not only continue, but shift and change and continue to be sort of a living, growing thing, even though she's gone.
So you yourself, as you just acknowledged, are a writer, and you're an emerging writer. And this, editing your mother's book, the manuscript, was itself a class in writing. And so this unexpected way of learning how to tell a story, how to write a novel, that's basically what I imagine this experience was. The most extraordinary graduate MFA class in creative writing. And that is so, just an enviable thing to get to learn how to write a novel through your mother's hand. did you ever feel a need to silence your mind, wanting to have 100 different conversations with your mom as you were writing and editing her manuscript?
Yeah, the editing process was so intense. When it first really sunk in that I was going to open this Word document that she had written and add some sentences, change some things, finish writing a scene, just the idea of that was so daunting and so intimidating. And there was a lot of self-doubt of like, what if I mess it up or make it worse? Or are we sure this is okay? But I really trusted Sally Kim, and we had a great conversation about things that could just make the manuscript shine even more. And so I was determined. I kind of realized I just had to dive in and do it immediately. So as soon as Sally Kim and I got off the phone, I opened the document and I was just like, I have to do it now, because if I procrastinate, it'll just seem more and more intimidating, And so I just plunged in immediately. And then once I got going, it actually was weirdly, like I stopped having that doubt, and it felt pretty natural, and I felt her presence, felt like conversation almost with her and me in my mind. And it was weirdly intuitive, because a lot of the humor in this book, it's kind of a dry, dark, very funny sensibility, and I feel like Mom and I had that in our relationship with each other, and the way we would joke around with each other is how the characters joke around with each other, or how the omniscient narration kind of makes its little witty comments. And so I felt like I could sort of tap into my mom and my's dynamic when I was doing the edits. And so I ended up completing them like pretty quickly, and it was very intense. And then I was just like, oh, I'm done. And it was like, oh, that actually didn't feel hard necessarily. It just felt really good and right and intuitive.
That's such a cool answer. Again, it goes back to this my sense, or the way I'm interpreting your whole incredibly rich story, or the rich story of the Fetishist. Your mom, in unexpected ways, propelled you, Kayla Min Andrews, as a writer.
Yeah, and because people say, oh, you're such a good daughter, you're taking care of your mom's legacy, and you're taking care of her work and making sure it gets heard, and like, yes, and I feel like she's caring for me through this process, and she's taking care of me, encouraging me, helping me grow and find my own voice. It's not a one-way thing. It's like we're each taking care of and helping and empowering each other through this process.
Yeah, I mean, it's so clear that you are not just your mother's daughter, but you are a writer. And I implore everybody that comes into the shop to pick up the book and read the first chapter of The Fetishist, and then read the first few pages and probably the whole. I mean, because it just takes you the afterword that you wrote. My whole body was shaking as I was reading it. In your afterword, you identified the motivation of being a writer as a terror of important things going unsaid. Is that something that you wrote? You wrote that, the terror of...
Yeah, that's me.
Can you talk more about that? How did you come to that brilliant moment of amplification, which is something a quote from your mom, that great writing has moments of beautiful amplification. That's a Katherine Minism. But I feel like this writing, terror of important things going unsaid as the motivation of the writer, is itself a beautiful moment of amplification.
Thanks. Yeah, I've had a lot of time to observe writers in their natural habitat, and sometimes, like in the case of my mom, sometimes a writer is someone who maybe it's easier to gloss over difficult truths, or it's easier to keep things on the surface level. But my mom, Katherine Min, was someone who was not interested in doing that, and who wanted to, talk about the hard things. And to me, the idea of the terror of important things going unsaid, it's connected to, Mom really liked what the quote about the unexamined life is not worth living. And especially towards the end of her life, when she was writing nonfiction, she was exploring herself and where she'd been and where she was headed, her mortality. But just the idea that if you can really know yourself and understand yourself, that there's such peace in that, and there's such solace, and there's such power in just being like, this is it, this is me, I know myself. And you're not hiding, and you're not trying to convince anyone of anything that's not true. I think it's connected to... Writers are devoting their lives to what are the important things that need to be said, and let's say them. And there's a fearlessness to that that I saw in Mom throughout her life. Was there a second part to that question?
No, it's great. Sorry, I'm just floored still by everything you're saying. One of my questions, and you already were talking about this, how it became very intuitive for you to edit this manuscript into the novel it now is. Was there ever a worry of eclipsing your mother's voice as you discovered your own?
Oh, no, I wouldn't say so. Yeah, because the manuscript was complete and was amazing, and so it felt like we were just making something amazing shine even more. And it was pretty minimal in the grand scheme of things. It was definitely not like a revamping or a stitching together, or it was adding little things here and there. But so I guess no, I didn't worry about. It's still like very much Mom's novel and Mom's voice, and it was a thrill that I got to contribute to that a little bit as a writer.
Cool. I was kind of curious at how finished it was. It sounds like, yeah. And now I'm closer to the process than I did just 20 minutes ago. Can you tell me more about yourself now after the Fetishist is now on its grand tour and you have had this masterclass in novel writing from your mom, from Katherine Min. What about you? Can you say like what's ahead for Kayla Min Andrews?
Yeah, so I have one semester under my belt. I just started an MFA program called Randolph. So it's a low residency. So although I live in New Orleans, I can do this Randolph MFA. It's in Virginia. Some amazing teachers there, and it's all about mentorship, and it's a very collaborative, supportive community. So I'll be doing that for the next year and a half, and I'm working on a novel, about a third of the way through a rough draft, but it's daunting. It's my first attempt to write a novel. Yeah, since 2019, some nonfiction, some essays, some personal essays. I have a personal essay coming out in the Massachusetts Review in March.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah,
That's so cool.
I was working on that one since early 2020, and then just recently got published. And it's really about Mom's death and how it affected me and my becoming a writer after she died. So yeah, I've been writing. I'm excited and nervous for that to be out.
Yeah, I want to ask, going back to the process of editing and making the Fetishist shine. I mean, can you clarify a little bit more about the timeline of after your mother's death? When did you just realize that this manuscript should be released? And then from there, when you were editing it and ramping it up, did you have to pace yourself because you were dealing with the grief of your mother's death and also the rage of the theme? I mean, the plot itself is so full of anger and like righteous anger. So I wonder, how did you dance around with those emotions?
The initial decision to publish, it happened in a circuitous way, I would say. So Mom was working on this novel from 2006 until 2014, and she stopped abruptly. She says she abandoned it. She had a full draft and she was still polishing, but she was a perfectionist and she liked to take her time. And so she wasn't showing the draft yet, but I knew she had one, and I had read chapters out of order as she had been writing them, but I hadn't read the full draft. And then in 2014, she got diagnosed with terminal cancer. And in that moment, she realized, I don't want to spend my remaining time finishing something I've already made. I want to spend my limited remaining time creating something new. And she realized she wanted to take on nonfiction, which she had never written before. She said, fiction is, you're creating this artifice, this imaginary world, and you're hinting and you're suggesting. But that's not what I want to do with my remaining time. Now that I know my time is limited, I want to just tackle things head on. I want to write direct, short, personal essays, nonfiction, and figure out.
So is it like memoir,
yeah,
nonfiction?
Exactly, like personal essays about her career as a writer, about her life, and about thinking about her own mortality and kind of her experience of that as a writer. There's a real urgency to those essays, and she was writing them right up until she died. I mean, until she, couldn't, but even in in her hospice bed. So I have this image burned in my mind of her in her hospice bed. It's the bed you can put kind of in a sitting position.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And she's on her laptop and she's working on these essays. That stuck with me, and it still took me 2 years after her death. It wasn't something she discussed or we discussed, or it wasn't on our minds. My brother and I were lucky, along with my stepdad, we got to spend her final months with her. And so just a lot of time, talking and just being together and expressing our love. And it was really good to be able to spend that time with her. But the issue of her legacy or her unpublished work never came up. I don't think she was thinking about it at all. None of us were. And so my uncle, Colin, started the Katherine Min Fellowship at MacDowell in her name. And that's when we did an event celebrating the first fellowship. And that's when I read as part of that event, I read a chapter of The Fetishist, and I read one of her essays. And the idea was just to, honor her. But then the feedback, everyone was like, wait, how can I read more? Can I read more? And then there were like women who said, I felt so seen by that excerpt. And like, when can I read the whole novel? What's up with this novel? And like, just all that feedback made us realize, like, wait, maybe it's not too late. I had just assumed she's gone, so it's too late for this work. But then it was like, oh no, like there's a real interest here. There's a real energy. And so that's when I reached out to some of her friends, one of whom was Kathy Park Hong, who they had met at an artist's residency. Yeah, and that's how. And so it was originally for the essays that I was looking for, just because that's what she had written most recently. And yeah, so I sent so Kathy Park Hong connected me to her agent, PJ, so I sent the manuscript of the essay collection first, and then he brought in Sally Kim, who's an amazing Korean-American editor who's been in the industry for a long time and was kind of trailblazing in a way in this industry that was mostly white and mostly male, and kind of with parallel to my mom in the writing world, because my mom started her writing career in the 80s when there was a lot less representation. Anyways, all this kind of magical connection that felt right. And then Sally Kim, who's primarily does fiction, was like, in some of these essays, she's mentioning this novel that she feels kind of guilty that she should be, getting out there, but isn't. Like, well, what's up with this novel? And that's actually what prompted me to go into her laptop, pull up the most recent draft, read it, and be like, oh my God, it's so good, and then send it. And so that's how The Fetishist came to be published. And yeah, and then the essays are on the horizon to get out as well.
That's so exciting. I mean, because my last question is about the fellowship your uncle put together in your mother's name, in Katherine Min's name. Can you say more about the Katherine Min MacDowell Fellowship?
Yeah. When my mom was in hospice in 2019, my uncle, I was there, and I remember he just sat down on her bed and was like, do you want us to establish a fellowship at MacDowell in your name? MacDowell was my mom's favorite artist residency. She went to a bunch of them, but MacDowell was her favorite. She would always talk about how they bring you lunch in a little lunch basket and leave it on your door. You get a cabin in the woods to yourself.
Where is MacDowell?
It's in New Hampshire.
Oh, so cool.
Yeah.
And that's where you grew up.
I did grow up in New Hampshire. Yes.
Yeah.
About an hour away.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a place that really values artists and gives them time and space to write. And Mom would always get so much work done there, but also make such amazing friendships there, literary friendships, artistic friendships. Yeah, I mean, as a kid, it was just this magical thing, because if we went to New York or Boston or Paris, she would know people there. And I'd be like, how do you know people in Paris or New York? And it was always from artist residencies. So it was a really important source of community in her life. Yeah, and so we knew that was her favorite, MacDowell. And so my uncle said, would you like us to set up a fellowship in your name? And Mom just nodded and said, yes, and it should be for Asian American writers. And that was that. So Colin made that happen.
Your family story is so incredible. Yeah, so that is such a beautiful way to end this interview. And the final question we always ask all of our guests, authors, is... what are 3 books that, if you enjoy The Fetishist, you would recommend to the audience?
Awesome question. So much fun to talk about books. One that pops into my head is called Little Rabbit. It's by Alyssa Songtsiridesh. And it also explores kind of tropes and sexuality. And it's about a woman, and I think she's 30, so a 30-year-old woman with a much older man, and the man is much wealthier, and yeah, and it's sort of exploring the trope of that, but also like, things are more complicated than just good or bad, right or wrong, and it's like, let's explore the complexity and the humanity and the messiness. And so I really enjoyed that novel, Little Rabbit.
Oh, that sounds great. Essentially, I'm the type of person that has relationships with men of many different ages. So I'm definitely going to look for that one on our shelves at Village Well.
Yeah, please do. Another one that comes to mind is Fiona and Jane by Jean Chen Ho. It's linked stories, but almost reads like a novel, and it's exploring a friendship between two Asian American women over time. So you see them when they're kids, you see them up until their late 30s. It's not exactly chronological, but over time you get to know their friendship and periods of time when they're closer, periods of time when they're more estranged. And you just see this friendship unfurl over time. You know, you get to know their family and other friends and boyfriends and such, and lovers come and go, but it's really about this friendship over time. Beautiful writing. Yeah, that's Fiona and Jane by Jean Chen Ho. And another one that I really enjoyed recently is called Holding Pattern by Jenny Shi. I believe she's a poet primarily, but she wrote this novel. It's a mother-daughter relationship. The daughter, I think, is in her early 30s or late 20s. She's just gone through a breakup, a really devastating breakup, and she's moved back home with her mother. Her mother is about to get married. So it's this very interesting situation where the daughter has to go to see her try on wedding dresses and all these things to prepare for her mother's wedding when she's just been dumped. And just, yeah, that relationship, how they've both like grown and changed over time. And it's kind of thorny, but it's beautiful, you know, the love, but also all of the mother-daughter emotions. It's a beautiful novel.
These are all perfectly described pitches for novels that I want to read and pick up at the Village Well. Thank you so much again and again, Kayla, for being here, for your mom, for writing this incredible book, The Fetishist, and for your Uncle Colin for setting up the Katherine Min MacDowell Fellowship, and then for knowing Jen, and for just this whole community, for bringing us all together. And so everybody stick around for our audio newsletter, Culver and New Cane, where we have even more book recommendations and a little bit about what's happening at the Village Well.
Yay!
Thank you so much, Kayla.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Hey, thanks for sticking around for our audio newsletter, Culver and New Cane, where we have a community member and also a local author. Her name is Kim Purcell. She recently had an event at the shop. Kim is here with us. Kim, why don't you tell us about the event and about yourself?
Sure. Well, I have a couple of published books, Trafficked and This Is Not a Love Letter. And I run programs for kids and teens to learn how to write their own books. And so we had an event here from a bunch of kids from La Bayona Elementary, where I've been running a program. And they wrote like 50 to 100-page books in a few months.
Wow, that's so cool. And so the event that you had at the Village Well, was that just an introduction to the experience?
No, that one was in person.
Yeah.
And over several weeks. And those kids worked really hard. They did do quite a bit of work also online.
Okay.
So they did various, they watched various videos and helped themselves write at home as well.
Okay, cool. Yep. Well, right on. Thanks for being a part of the community and having such great events like that. And, there'll be links about Kim Purcell's online courses and her courses in the page notes below. So, of course, we have you here today to give a book recommendation to all the listeners. What book do you recommend?
Okay, so now, even though, I teach kids and teens, I also teach adults. So this one I recommend for the adults because it is definitely not a kid or teen book. And it is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. And it is very exciting, kind of thrilling fantasy.
So that book has been on the bestsellers shelf for as long as I've been at the Village Well. Tell us about the plot. What's the story?
Okay, so I don't want to give too much away because it's filled with twists and turns and all that. But what I think is so incredible about it is just basically it's this fantasy book with dragons in it. This main character, Violet Sorrengail, she is just this feisty, funny, interesting character who has been training for the scribe quadrant, which is sort of the intellectual wing of the army. And then her mom, who's the general, says, oh, by the way, you're going to join the Dragon Riders quadrant. And everybody typically dies in that quadrant, even before they become actual dragon riders. The risks are so high. And this poor girl, she hasn't trained for it her whole life like everyone else. And on top of that, she has this ligament disorder. So she gets hurt very easily just in normal life, just walking. So, the chances of her surviving are not good.
Wow, that is a great pitch. I've read the back cover numerous times, and I am more excited to pick up the book than I've ever been. It's The Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, and we have to be clear, it's for adults, not for...
Oh, yes. Actually, at the beginning, you might be mistaken and think, oh, this is, a young, teenage protagonist. It's for teens. It's a YA. It's an exciting YA, and you might not know. So just heads up, I accidentally told my older teen class, "Oh, you guys, this is a great book I'm reading. Gotta read it." And then the next week I was like, "Do not read this book." So because, I didn't realize it had a very, very extreme sex scenes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much, Kim. This has been really fun. I can't wait for people to listen, and I know I'm finally maybe gonna pick up the book, and I think I'm a little afraid to pick it up because it's so addicting.
A lot of people say that, okay, it's one of those books. I read literary fiction only, and all I can say is, listen, good literary fiction is page turning, filled with page turning fun. And it should be an escape. It shouldn't be so boring. You're like trying to make your way through it. To me, that's not good fiction. And you can have all the gorgeous literary devices, which this book does have, and it's filled with tension.
Yeah. The reason I'm a little afraid to pick it up, because I'm afraid I'm going to get too addicted to it, because I know people are chopping at the bit to get the latest in the series. Just came out in I believe it was in November.
Oh yeah, it's hard when it ends, and then you're like, I had to wait because I had read it, the first one, and then I had to wait for the second one, which is just as good. Nice. It's amazing. And sometimes people mess up their second or third book, right? But no, this is just as amazing.
Well, this is a great shelf talker recommendation for The Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. Thanks so much, Kim.
You're welcome.
And this Friday we have our board game night at Village Well Books and Coffee in the shop. And then on Sunday, March 17th, we're going to have live Irish music on St. Patrick's Day. And then very exciting, we have on Monday a book signing with Jenna Rose Nethercott, and our very own Colin Hinckley will be hosting. Jenna Rose Nethercott wrote the recent release best-selling book, 50 Beasts to Break Your Heart.
Looking for links to the books mentioned in this episode of Shelf Talkers? Looking for ways to connect with this week's guest? Maybe you want to reach out to us about thoughts or questions for the podcast. For all of that, check out the show notes beneath the episode. You can also order your books online through villagewell.com. This episode of Shelf Talkers is brought to you by Village Well Books and Coffee. It was produced, edited, and hosted by Julia Elizabeth Evans and Jared Casaubon, and our theme music is from Noah Vickland. See you in 2 weeks, and keep reading.